Oh, 2 people already for my broken camera live stream. It will sort out in a few minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Hey, Noni. Two people coming for the strobe lighting show. That is my webcam. I kind of feel bad. I feel like I should probably wait so many minutes, then start up the stream, but whatever. It gives people a heads up that know my stream is going to be streaming soon, right? Okay, you can actually see me now. Sort of feels a bit quicker than usual. Sorting itself out. That hasn't still sorted itself out. Yeah, it's getting a lot better, a lot quicker. While it's sorting itself out, I'm just going to make a coffee. I'll be right back. Well, camera looks like it has sorted itself out now. One person in the room. Two people in the room. Wow, it's really hotting up now. So this is just going to be another sort of relaxed live stream, because why not? So I'm thinking, if you've got any questions or you want to talk about anything computer, Linux related, maybe not even Linux or computer related, that's fine by me. We'll just see where we go from there. Three people now. I kind of feel like if I do either a post or maybe like the pre-live notification, that I'll get, I don't know, like another 10 people coming in early on. Maybe I should do that in future and plan it a bit better, but I don't know. Maybe I set people up for disappointment if I do the pre-planning, because I make it a big event and then like certain people can't make it. I don't know. Hey James, L4NC. Hi L4NC. How are you? There you go, 4 people now. Yeah, so if you randomly gone back to 2. I was going to say what I said earlier. If you've got any Linux questions or questions about computers, or you want to talk about computers or Linux or BSD or whatever, and I said that when there's 4 people in, and those 2 people, well, 2 people since I've last said it have gone out of the room, so now we're back to 2. Not that it matters, but all 2 of you, if you've got a question, all 3 of you now have got a question or want to talk about something, what's happening in the Linux world? You know, it's funny, I don't actually really keep up the Linux world, if that makes sense. I do and I don't, so I'll watch the Brody Robertson videos and I guess, is it Lunduke and all these types of things, but I feel I don't really go on the news websites that much. I never really did. I always find them disappointing. And without being cynical, are they all written by AI now? I don't know. I don't get the impression there's much in the way of journalism in the Linux website sphere anymore, but I don't know. Of course, back in the day, before I was using Linux even, there was like magazines, and I think that was the way of the world with so much. So many things used to have magazines. And they kind of like tried to do it online and in print. And then they just went online, and now they just don't even want to have to pay for staff. So just go with AI, but I don't know. It was technically an editor, but I don't know. So it's funny because, of course, when Linux started, the World Wide Web, as it was, you know, beginning, before people were really even using it, and outside of, say, CERN and universities maybe and specialist places, I imagine before any web content, it was all magazines. I don't know, really throughout the 90s, probably magazine content was probably quite significant compared to what was online. But then in the mid-90s, I guess web content, sounds so wrong saying content, you know, web pages and alike were probably quite popular and quite big, but I don't know. I feel like it was probably a big space for Linux, but again, I don't really know. It'd been interesting to see some of that stuff at the time. Well, 2 people only. I'm guessing America hasn't woken up yet. What would be the time in New York? Like 6? No, be 8 or 9 a.m. I try not watching those big vloggers, Brody, DT, etc. They're just showing only one view, most popular. Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I'd say for Brody Robertson is that, to be fair, whatever view he takes, which is certainly not probably my view on a lot of projects and software, I say, well, obviously he uses desktop environments now, really. I know he uses, is it Neri, the weird scrollable window manager type thing? But I feel that he's probably good for getting a pulse on Linux type news and things going on, whether his conclusions are your conclusions. So I think he's quite good for that. Their point of view are very narrow. GUI all leading plus all leading corpo view. Yeah. Well, this is also sort of why I feel that Linux is a bit depreciating in, I wouldn't say quality, in direction. I feel the traditional Linux user space is depreciating. I don't know if I talked about this in the last live stream. I think I did, I'm sure. I stopped. Oh, and sorry, yeah, DT. So DistroTube is, I'll be honest, I don't really know what to make of DistroTube. He kind of just has always been the way he's been, but I don't know. I'll be absolutely honest, I don't really know what to think about his channel anymore. I think it might have been more interesting in the day, but now I just feel, it sounds really bad because I'm not trying to give any other YouTuber a hard time. Not that he would need to worry because he's one of the most popular on the face of it, biggest subscribed Linux channels on YouTube. But I feel a bit like his channel is on, not, can't think of the adjective, autopilot, or it's almost like in maintenance mode. Can't think of the word. Or it's just sort of coasting by. I don't really feel he has much to say now on Linux. I think in the past he was probably closer to Luke Smith at the beginning. Of course, they started their channels at a similar time, but then so was Brody Robertson. But it's funny how that rather than running away from desktop environments or convoluted software, they seem to have run towards it. A lot of these Linux channels that started small and sort of the foundations of the Linux kernel, the core utilities, and the terminal. That all seems to be gone now in any real sense of the word. I know he's done those video man pages recently. Funny fact, before my current incarnation of my YouTube channel, a couple of years ago, I actually did what I thought was quite a novel idea, which was basically video man pages, but I did them without you didn't see my face, and I did them in relation to just I was trying to do literally every single core utility, in the sense of, so basically every command that was in the Linux kernel in the core utilities, I was basically going through them. I have actually like a Vim file which has like thousands of lines relating to like every utility, core utility that's installed on like an Arch distribution. And then I was working my way through and doing like a video on like what it does. Here's the man page, like DT does with the video man page. And I did that for, I don't know, so many months, and then I gave up on it, and I actually deleted all those videos, which I sort of, I don't regret. But the reason I did that, the reason I didn't carry on doing that, was because naively I thought that the majority of those commands would be really for user space, and of course most of it is really for, you know, automation and scripts, and basically not necessarily user space, or like legacy stuff for like random encoding of images. it's kind of interesting in a way, but yeah, I gave up on that. But I did it because you wouldn't see anybody else doing it. You didn't see anybody covering all these thousands of command line tools that usually get invoked by other programs or scripts or whatever that you would never use in user space. So it was kind of pointless, but you'd never see anybody covering that. Yeah, I guess you could say admin things, but it was like, again, you might be surprised, you might not be, but if you look at the programs, I can't remember the command, is it appro something, but there was a command you could get which would literally list out all of the like dependencies, like all the command line programs that you had installed, that came from like the core utilities, the kernel, even, I guess, bash. So more than just, like your usual core utilities that you'll see on Linux YouTubers. And a funny thing as well, I did do a video on I think it's the column command, which isn't, a big deal. It's literally like it just filters out columns in like text and whatever. And I saw another Linux YouTuber do it more recently, like half a year ago, and their video on it got like 100,000+ views on this column command. I was like, really? I think I probably got 100 views and they got 100,000. So it goes to show you, if you get all the glitzy presentation going and you strip away the usefulness and you have 5-minute long intros and outros with flashing graphics and music, that's how you can get 100,000 views on a column core utility. 6 people now. I stopped watching him and many other Linux streams because of the overkill Wayland videos. I don't care about Wayland. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I kind of agree. The thing with Wayland is, again, I think, like I've said in my previous videos, it's not about liking it or loathing it, but it's probably best to be forearmed, or let's say have an insurance policy, future-proofing your computer. Even if you never want to use Wayland, if for whatever reason you have a distribution and X11 has become so depreciated, rightly or wrongly, you might just have to use Wayland, whether you like it or not. I feel it in the same way as I don't really like using the graphical user environment, X11 and Wayland, but I know I can't technically or literally exist on the TTY. So I've got to have the X server installed and so forth. So I think just keeping the insurance policy there, or the future proof, and that's why I've done videos on Wayland. Now the irony is, obviously I'm using Hyperbola now, and Hyperbola does not ship with Wayland. Of course, it doesn't technically ship with X11. It ships with, well, you can't get it from the repositories, sorry. What you can get from the repositories is Xenokara, which is like a BSD equivalent of X11 with some security changes. And it's perfectly fine. I use it. One interesting thing as well about Xenokara on Hyperbola, and this is on the 32-bit as well, I don't seem to get any what's it, artifacting, or what, vsync is it, or whatever it is, or page, sorry, I don't seem to get any video tearing. Literally on Hyperbola, on Xenokara, which is basically X11, I don't get any video tearing. So I don't know why that is, because I haven't got any of those programs installed that like tries to mitigate tearing on X11 or this kind of thing. And I think technically as well with Intel computers, you can go into like the settings, you create like a config file that basically puts in vsync or whatever. but at a huge, well, I say huge, I don't really know, but at a cost to your computer's performance, but I don't literally know because I don't need to. But I'll still get screen tearing on my 64-bit computer, my main one, and on this one, of course. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And Lunduke doing just big fuzz for views he's not always have right. Yeah, you know what? I never really got into that Lunduke. And I don't know what to think of him in the sense of the only thing with that Lunduke, this is what I would say, is it seems to like desperately, like a desperately well, it seems to be like running a business with a bit of Linux attached. Is that wrong? So obviously, I think recently, like, put all of his videos behind a paywall, as in you couldn't watch any of his videos on YouTube, but you could like listen to like an audio stream or something of it somewhere. So there's like all these outlets for listening and viewing, which is fine. But it just seems to me that his whole setup is about, it's like his business, which is fine around Linux, but it does seem a bit of a stretch. But I know he's been doing it for a long time. Yes, until they invent ads and how to play games. Admin things. I'm not against Wayland. I'm unbothered whether my distro uses X11 or Wayland. Yeah, yeah, I know this is kind of often contradicted, and again, I'm not actually giving Wayland a hard time with this, but there are just things that feel like they're not working, and without them working, it kind of makes the graphical user, desktop, whatever you're using, window manager, whatever, kind of annoying. So I don't know. I know I need to do a video on a couple of more things on Wayland, which I think is like workarounds for things that you normally have on X11 that aren't on Wayland. So I know I need to do videos on those. I noticed that it's also easy to distinguish between vloggers based on whether they use window managers or large environments such as KDE. I recently read that FreeBSD intends to add KDE. Yeah, I heard that as well. As options while installation, why for more bloat? Now it's interesting. I had a comment recently on one of my videos from somebody who does comment regularly on my videos, who historically uses BSDs and FreeBSD. And it was interesting that he said he didn't like, well, it's not that he didn't like, but one thing he didn't like about OpenBSD was that they didn't like you messing with the kernel, which he thought was unreasonable because it's free and open source software. So if he wants to mess with the kernel, he should be allowed to mess with the kernel. But obviously FreeBSD is all about security, so I don't know. So that's what, OpenBSD. So that's why he uses FreeBSD, which is a bit more of a free-for-all. But I mean, I guess when I think about it, unless you're a developer, you probably use FreeBSD for security anyway, unless you need to mess around with the kernel or do development in the kernel directly. I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily mess with the kernel development-wise, but I'm going to use, what is it, ModProbe and that to do different things, so on Linux. So it'll be interesting when Hyperbola Linux becomes Hyperbola BSD. Oh, sorry, Hyperbola Linux Libre, as they GNU Linux Libre, as they say. You've got to say it. Wow, 7 people. Oh yeah, I didn't say this in my previous stream, but I thought it was ironic where I'd made a video about graphical user interfaces. Not long after that, I had some updates on Arch Linux, and I don't know what it is. Although it's well, this is on my testing computer, that is. So on my testing computer, I had some updates. This is after I criticized the graphical user environments. And for my testing computer streams, I actually use, don't laugh, Google Chrome. I use Google Chrome just because obviously it's a Google account with my YouTube, and for my streams and stuff like that, I just open Google Chrome just because I know on the face of it that everything's compatible. It won't throw up some weird error. Well, I say it won't. If I use like Firefox to do my streams or something, I just assume that everything will work because they want it to work, right? And it doesn't matter when I'm doing it on my testing computer. I'd never use Google Chrome for anything else, obviously, or any other computer. But I noticed ever since I criticized like graphical user environments and desktop environments, almost every time I open Google Chrome now, it actually crashes the whole computer. Like there's some weird memory leak or something. It literally just freezes up the computer. Although I think it might just be the graphical environment. And since I did that video on locking your, your server keys, where you can, switch between TTY 2, 3, 4, 1, etc. Every time it freezes now, I can't switch to them because they're all locked in the graphical user environment. I assume that the computers crash. So if I didn't have them locked, I'd be able to go into TC2, TCY2, 3, and all that, and then just kill X11 or whatever, or Google Chrome. And so I have to like hard reset. This is kind of amusing to me. Is that like karma, criticizing the graphical user interface? What do you think about the constant pursuit of new hardware? Well, what do I think of that? So I guess it's I made a post about this recently, or a comment recently about the pursuit of new hardware in relation to somebody else's comment, mainly about GUIs. So how to break this down? So let's look at the pursuit of it in 2 ways. First one being consumers, general consumers, and the second being, let's say, businesses and research businesses, or let's say AI companies. Okay. So the first thing is consumers or the general public. And what I said in this message or this comment was I'm not actually against people being put off using computers, meaning that this was in relation to the graphical user interface, that if we had an environment in the 80s and 90s where consumer computers weren't, say, viable for the general public, so let's say your family wouldn't buy a computer because it didn't have a graphical user environment. However, let's say the computers that were being released in the early 1980s were things like the Spectrum and whatever, that were all focused around the command line interface and programming and inputting data. And these were usually bought for, say, younger people, children, right? And almost, I think that is more desirable than having ubiquity or easily usable computers that the whole family, from mother, father, grandmother, child, young child, could use. I actually think that's a good thing. I have no problem with the majority of people not wanting to buy a computer because they feel that unless everything has some sort of graphical veneer or a mouse to do everything, I have no problem if not having those things stops them buying a computer. Meaning that if you buy a computer, there's a steep learning curve, and I'm completely okay with that. Meaning that if the majority of people don't buy a computer because of the steep learning curve, I'm okay with that. Meaning that if we don't have a world where everybody who could buy a computer, in a sense of they've got the money to buy a computer but don't because they feel they're too complicated for them, I'm actually okay with that. I'm okay with every single person on the planet not having a computer. For me, that I'm the complete opposite of this sort of utopia that has existed around consumer computing. I'm a lot happier that computers can computer development is slower, and that the attitude isn't we need more elaborate frameworks, we need more elaborate graphical user environments, we need more shiny things to distract people to make their current computers obsolete and for them to buy a new computer, even though the computer they had is perfectly viable for the majority of computing. That's not to say I'm not about banning computers. I don't want to ban computers for people, if you see what I'm saying. But if people are put off by this learning curve, that's okay with me. I have no problem with that. So, and I was kind of accused of being elitist in this respect, and I guess technically I am. But what I'm trying to say is that the world got on pretty well and pretty fine where every single person didn't have a computer. And I think if we were in that same situation now, the world would possibly be even better. And if that's like being conceited because people like myself and people on this chat would still get a computer, well, that's perfectly fine. Nobody has to have a computer. Nobody has to, in the sense of, in that world, nobody has to have a computer. You know, you don't just exist for a corporation to be some kind of consumer So you can have e-commerce shoved down you, advertising directly into your operating system, and subscriptions thrown at you at every single web page. That world, if it didn't exist, for most people, I don't know about you, is fine by me. But if you are somebody, let's say a normal person, who does have some money, and you want to put in a bit of effort to be able to use that computer, you're willing to go for a bit of a hazing period like people did in the early 80s, good, because that's how it should be. So in that way, chasing hardware, chasing the latest shiny piece of hardware, that means your convoluted desktop environment or your convoluted software needs 9 or 10 gigabytes to idle, is crazy to me. And again, it's just an excuse to consume for these companies. Is it really good for the user? And what I really don't want people to confuse is what's good for the consumer and what's good for the user aren't necessarily the same thing. Because the consumer is just always going to be the consumer. Okay, you can get on Facebook, you know, with the pre-installed desktop icon, or you can get onto, you know, Apple Pay, so you can use your Apple Pay, you know, instantly and link to your cloud after 2 seconds as some sort of feature for a consumer. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for the user. I think it just says a lot about the state of computing. So for the consumer, if we had a situation where hardware wasn't as quote unquote powerful as it is now, and it was closer to what computers were, say 5, 10 plus years ago, or say 10 plus years ago, or even longer, and that, you know, there was a focus around the command line interface rather than the graphical interface, that's perfectly fine by me. And if that means that, you know, a lot of people are put off by it, well, it doesn't matter. Nobody has to have a computer. We shouldn't be in a world where you have to be a consumer, where you have to have yourself on the latest web browser, connected by the, you know, intravenously to Facebook, Meta, Amazon. I know these things feel like cliches to say, but look at our actual world now, and just if how do you actually feel about the web? Anytime you install even say Firefox, it preloads every commercial Amazon, eBay, Facebook website on its start page as default. Not having that, I don't think that's a bad thing. And then I guess the next thing is to say is like business. So business is different. Business is different in the sense of, if you look at business in the past, say in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, nothing's really changed in the sense of business doesn't really care about money regarding computer infrastructure. I know really small businesses might, but a lot of businesses don't. A lot of the most advanced businesses or wealthy businesses or huge capital businesses will be full of machines that were built decades ago that just work, that haven't been upgraded, right? We all know this. And then a lot of other businesses as well, particularly businesses focused around operatives, let's say, or people with a laptop, they again, they see the computer situation as completely disposable. So because it, like the user, or who the personal computer user, the laptop and software has become completely disposable. But for business, it doesn't really, I mean, they don't care about it in a way like the consumer doesn't care about it. But they'll have their licenses or their situation with vendors, right? So they'll have, we want 100 laptops for this year. Give us basically the latest and greatest, give us a discount, whatever, who cares? Yeah, got Windows 10, got Windows 11, whatever, that's fine. Yeah, we can install a VPN for our employee, great. That's fine. And then they'll go to the vendors for, oh, we need this piece of software, give us a license for, 2 years. Can we have a help desk that, automates this kind of stuff? So like a database like SAP. Oh yeah, you want £500,000 a year? That's fine. Does that mean that helps us ship, billions of pounds worth of products? That's fine. We don't care. Business doesn't care about computing in that sense. All they care about, does it work? Is it what's enabling them to make money? So that's like the general computing. Now, obviously, if you have like a specialist company that relies on, say, cutting edge computing, that's different. But really, again, it's business and computing is a huge racket. And I get the feeling that's kind of always been the case. Computers really, after the Second World War, were for businesses, right? They were for banks, they were for I don't know, engineering, to do specialist tasks. And nothing's really changed there. Obviously, a lot of businesses now have staff that are doing general tasks and therefore on a general computer. But I don't feel business has really changed. And business has got money. Businesses always do. They'll always be catered to. And let's put it this way: if we're thinking about um, users in relation to people who work for businesses, is always going to suck, because by definition business doesn't care about its employees. Businesses only care about making money. So they can give you the worst or the best user environment. You could be running the most perfect Unix environment or the worst Microsoft Windows environment. They don't care. Does it get them to ship money, or does it get them to ship their product and them to make billions of pounds of money, let's say? That's all they care about. So either way, as a user, you're always going to suffer, I would say, by definition, because it's not about the user, it's about the business, right? So then you've got like your third situation, like a sort of a more unique, I mean, I say unique. So if you think back to, say, like the old days of military, right? They would have, probably when they first supercomputers and whatever. If you think of like supercomputers for, specialist things, crunching numbers, solving problems for the US government, or, some European government, or the USSR or something, that's a completely unique situation. Now, of course, you've got AI, right? You've got companies that, are trying to create products, but they're having to use completely bespoke computers. So they're going to chase the latest graphics card. I mean, graphics cards. Why is Nvidia the biggest company in the world by marketization? Because AI, right? So in relation to, in that side of computing, of course they're gonna chase all the latest stuff, and this therefore also ties back to the users, because obviously they want to serve the users AI prompts so they can make money at some point. My concern is more of the user, the personal computer user, because that's the only space you've got a degree of control. Because I've sort of said this before in a recent live stream, if you're having to spend your days, day in, day out, using a computer, why would you want to suffer? You want the best environment for you. Why would you want to spend inordinate amounts of money? Why do you want to have to pay a subscription? And again, I think the analogy for this is if you've got a Windows computer and it idles, it's idling at like 8 gigabytes. Now, I know people are going to say, well, RAM or whatever is cheap these days, but the point is, the computer you used a handful of years ago is probably inadequate, is becoming inadequate. You know, just what they say, planned obsolescence. You, as a user, everything you do has planned obsolescence in store for you. So why would you want to suffer that in principle? Whereas really the few options you've got to avoid that are basically Linux and Linux type of distributions and BSD, I guess. That's how I feel about chasing new hardware. It's like everything, it's just really an excuse to be a consumer and behave like a consumer. And really, you're not doing anything for the benefit of yourself as a user. You're doing it's the benefit of the consumer, right? And the consumer is just really, you're just a vassal for Amazon and others to make them money and to have like the latest trinkets and shiny things. I know that's kind of a cliche thing to say, but again, look at the state of computing, look at the state of the web, look at the state of the world. So, for example, think of like the pandemic, right? Look at the structure of your economy. Now, if you're in the United Kingdom, look at the structure of your economy. When the pandemic happened, within the first, say, 5 or 6 months, what the government realized was that millions of people were sat on billions of pounds that they hadn't spent. The reason they hadn't spent those billions of pounds in their bank account was for the obvious reason that everywhere was closed, apart from online, okay? But people basically had more disposable income than they had pre-pandemic. And the whole structure of the economy is consumption. The whole structure of the economy is that if you've got money in your bank account and it's not being spent, it's not being taxed. So the whole attitude of the government was you need to go out, you need to go to restaurants, you need to go to shops, you need to spend money because you're supporting the economy. You've got to understand that the state of the world is inextricably linked to the state of the economy. And that really you're seen as a means to distribute money so it can be taxed. It's no different from why you're using a web browser. Either way, web browser, whether it's Google, whether it's Firefox, is about getting you to spend money, because Firefox rely on Google to give them money and others to give them money. The web is really a huge funnel direction into commercial websites. One of the reasons the web became so popular was because they realized how they could have, and I will do a video on this, how you could have images inline on a web page with text originally, which meant commercial opportunities. Meant you could display images and text on the web page together to sell you something or to advertise you something you can buy. So that's also one of the huge disappointments of the web, is by design it's for advertisers, it's for sellers and marketeers. If you ever get a chance, look at Dr. Chuck's internet history, look at the video, watch that video and find the bit where he interviews the co-creator of the web, guy from Belgium whose name escapes me, and he basically, Robert Cullew, he effectively says to Charles Severance, Dr. Chuck, that the design of the web as it is a huge mistake. The way they designed it was not what it is now. The way they designed it was that you have hyperlinks that open up a separate window. Not necessarily like a tab even, but like a separate window. So you have your block of text, and if you want to open a picture, you click on the link and it opens a separate picture window, right? And the point of this is that graphics and text are not overlapping. They're not overlapping. They're separate windows. So that if you think about advertising, everything's in line, right? You think of JavaScript. Say you open a news website. You'll have blocks of text interspersed with adverts, interspersed with adverts, interspersed with adverts, interspersed with adverts, right? Or subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. And of course, it's all based heavily on JavaScript. That was never the design of the web by definition. It would have made it 100 times more difficult for advertisers, particularly advertisers, which are inextricably linked with commerce, to take over the user space. If you really think about the web now, I mean, it kind of was at the beginning. This is what they realized early on when it all went wrong. And it went wrong for a specific reason. Why the original vision didn't happen or the original design wasn't continued is specific. And I'll go into a video. It was basically because of compatibility with a web browser. I did this actually in a previous live stream. I did sort of cover this. But what was I going to say? But it would have made it 100 times more difficult to implement the kind of e-commerce funnel that is the web now. It wouldn't have been perfect. And there's other issues with the web I don't like anyway. I don't think the web was ever good. But what commercial people realized very early on, so think of like Amazon, for example, early on, is that the web really was designed, or the design of the web tailored to them. It basically became a shopping mall. Whereas really what the web should have been was like not like a library necessarily, but predominantly a space for like a community of things like libraries and gathering centers and whatever. What eventually happened, or very quickly on, is the web is like going into the shopping mall or the shopping center and being bombarded by sales or bombarded by shop advertisements, window spaces, trying to sell you things. And then if you just carry on walking to the back of the shopping center, you might find a library at the end, and you might be able to get to something worth getting to without having bought, you know, a pair of shoes or a new coat or a new desk or a new computer, right? You have to basically you have to traverse that whole space. Think of any time you use a Google search. You know, you're bombarded. Well, I think it's slightly different now, but you used to be bombarded with adverts, right? Even like the Google search, you're bombarded by adverts. Usually, like some of the top listings would be like trying to sell you stuff because the keywords got to the top. So that's really the web. It's traversing a shopping mall to maybe find something worth finding at the end without having spent a load of money. So yeah, anyway, let's have a look at some of the comments. I'm running a 14-year-old CPU. Good stuff. Well, I'm running a 20-year-old CPU, or 19-year-old CPU, 32-bit. How about that? NVIDIA has a new computer breakthrough every season. Is this true or just marketing? Hee hee. Well, I mean, think of like NVIDIA now, how dependent they are on keeping. I mean, I know they were probably publicly listed company for years, but think how desperate NVIDIA is every minute now to give out some kind of press release or some kind of, you know, statement to the stock market to go, hey, look, we're making AI generation training even better because this and this. Think of how desperate they must be now to appease the stock market because of their position, right? All related to AI as well. I mean, NVIDIA have sort of ceased being anything about computer games, right? That's what you used to get your NVIDIA graphics card to play computer games. Now, that's like a little sidecar. That's a little appendage to their whole thing of selling millions and millions of unbelievably expensive graphics cards to OpenAI or whatever it is, and you know, XAI, and governments, I guess. Got to chase them dollars, right? Mine is 13 years old. I'm just saying, a 15-year-old computer is a powerful tool for home use. Current GPUs and AI have such capabilities that no one will ever utilize them at home. Yeah, so I've sort of said this before. There's really, on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with older computers, and how I feel about the development of new computers and computing. None of it really matters for the home user, only that most home users are running whatever's shipped with their computer when they buy it. And therefore, that's going to depreciate. Case in point, Microsoft Windows 11. Your computer's so many years old, not even, vaguely old at all. It's not that they tell you now, oh, it's going to run slow, you really should upgrade, but we'll let you run it. It's like, no, you're not running this anymore. You're not getting security updates. That's it. And they followed the phone, in a way, if you look at it, they followed the phone model, because what phone manufacturers like Apple and Samsung and others have realized, until certain directives from like the EU, is that they could effectively go on that cliche notion of computers are only good for 3 to 4 years for the user. Then you need to chuck it away and buy a new one or get a new one on contract, okay? And Microsoft have effectively done that. They've effectively said, it's no good upgrading. You can't upgrade. Your computer is now incompatible with Windows 11. We're not even giving you the option. So you need to buy a new one. Therefore, how convenient, a new Windows 11 license, right? I mean, it is as cynical as it sounds. That's what they're in the business of, making money at your expense. What's so frustrating about this is that, again, everything to do with this is inextricably linked to the graphical user interface, because that's what made computers popular. And I don't think necessarily that's a good thing. And popular in the sense of that everybody thought, we need to have a computer now because the web and this. And if there was a world where people didn't end up feeling like every single person had to have a computer because it was too much of a steep learning curve, and therefore development of computers was slower. I mean, I'm not even like advocating a utopia where everybody's like using Unix or something. I mean, that'd be great, because at least you wouldn't have to suffer all those indignities. But what I'm saying is that development of computers for the user particularly has been inextricably linked with just treating you as a consumer, selling you things, throwing adverts at you. That's my issue. So probably kind of topic there, I don't know. No, I'm not. Anyway, yeah, 64 gig for PC. Yeah. Did you hear about the direction Microsoft wants to take it? Voice commands and less mouse and keyboard accessible and even more ignorant users while training their AI algorithms. Yep. So is it any surprise? Would you expect anything less? See, again, what frustrates me with buying a computer or a laptop is, you take this computer here, right? Said this before. How many keys are on there? Many keys, yeah? So you've got all those devices of input. And the attitude to what's extraordinary about this attitude about laptops and desktops is that you've got all those keys and effectively they're redundant, meaning that the only time you use those keys is to construct sentences. That a keyboard is like a typewriter when it's not. A keyboard is exactly what you want it to be. You want a different format, Dvorak or whatever, you can have a different format. You want combination keys, shortcuts, you want to remap keys. That's the point of a laptop keyboard, to interact with the software. What a lot of graphical user environments do, like Microsoft's one, is to make the keyboard completely redundant in a computer sense. It doesn't function in any real sense on a computer, that everything is reduced down to 2 buttons on a mouse and a ball that moves the cursor around. And that basically you've got to try and compress everything down into 2 buttons and just like if pure physical. I know it might not sound much, but think about this. Think of how much traveling the hand that controls the mouse has to do to do a load of tasks, rather than just pressing a key, a mapped key, or use a command or type a command. Think of just, and this is, people wonder why they get, repetitive strain injuries. It's just a completely bonkers way of using a computer. You've got a whole keyboard and you're reduced to using a mouse and a trackpad. So is it any surprise that they want voice commands and less mouse and keyboard, even though the keyboard's been made redundant accessible? Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And of course, this was the big thing on phones, because obviously it's a phone, right? You've got the speaker. Now, what I will say, and I've said this before, I think on a live stream, I'm not actually, people think I'm anti-graphical user interfaces. The device has got to be right. If it's a phone, graphical user interfaces are perfect. I don't want a keyboard on my phone because it's clearly not a device. I know you had the old like Nokia and whatever, but I want a graphical user interface with a phone. That's what they're there for. But it's just amazing to me that, laptops and desktops are just, redundant devices. Half of the device is basically redundant because you're just using a trackpad or a mouse, James, we've gone down the wrong path, as was the case with electric combustion engine before 1900 were first electric ones. Yeah, that's true. The first cars were basically, well, a lot of cars in the early years were already electric, right? And they want the next Windows version to have Copilot listening and watching the screen non-stop. Well, of course. So this is the thing. This is where these things become self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Because Copilot needs to generate a return, or Microsoft's AI investments need to generate a return, you don't have the option. They might give the impression that you have the option because there'll be some toggle until they turn it back on, but you basically don't have any option. So again, like I've sort of said these things before, you don't like the desktop environment you get with Windows, tough. You don't like that you don't have the shortcuts you want in Microsoft Windows like you would in, say, you can map in Linux, tough. You don't like that you don't have you can't get a tiling window manager in Windows in any normal sense without some hack around, tough. You don't like that Microsoft Word and all this every year go up in price and they're trying to scam you out of more money because they're throwing in Copilot, tough. You don't like that, you know, Notepad has probably a Copilot, Copilot something or another, tough. You don't like that Copilot is, you know, probably, you know, sending back all of your data back to Microsoft waiting to get hacked, tough. That's the point. I like small web minimalistic browsers. Yep, I do as well. But again, this is the problem with the web, right? The problem with the web is inline graphics, and then obviously in more recent years, JavaScript. Everything's inline, so a minimalist web browser is impossible in any true function. And the web is not designed, you know, the modern web is designed to be anti that. Whereas the first web was closer to Gopher, which I want to make clear, I'm not actually huge advocates of the early web. I don't think that the web was ever good. What I will say is that the first intention of the web, design-wise, was better than what we got. And the separation of image and text was good. And I think actually this was probably where it was, well, actually it's kind of a false, it's like a distinction without a difference, meaning. So when I said about you would open a separate window, when you say clicked on a link, it would open the image separately. You didn't have inline images, for example. Gopher's basically the same. So on Gopher, you can download files and images from basically a link, right? And then all you do, because it's Unix, if you're using Unix system, you could just either automate it or you could just, you know, have a split screen. And if you want to view that image, you just, you know, view the image in MPV or something, or, you know. Now, the thing is, like, if you said this to a normal person, they think you're crazy. But the thing is, it's like, what is it, like Winston Churchill said, the victors write the history. And the history is that that's the way you do things. You use, you know, use what the web has become, not what it should have been. Day one, right? So that's why they feel it's completely normal. GitHub also has a problem with AI and Copilot. Well, MS doing that everywhere, yeah. I miss the days of BBS and MUDs. So I've heard of BBSs, and on the face of it, they seem to be, again, where it's probably like more sane environment. Whatever the protocol was for BBSs, I'm not sure, can't remember. But I've never heard of MUDs. Multi-use dungeon. Oh, multi-user dimension. Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I've heard of those. I don't know. I even noticed the problem with Linux distribution. They're moving towards business where the money is. Yeah, so it does feel that there's an irony to, say, the PewDiePie videos on Linux. It feels like a seminal moment where PewDiePie shows Linux off to the world in the desktop environment sense, right? Desktop Linux is viable. Yes, there's a bit of command line stuff, but hey, if you really want to, just install Linux Mint or Ubuntu or whatever, which is fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with encouraging people. But as you know, let's say nefarious behind the scenes people are seeing this, right? And the same people that, you know, ruined the computer for users with graphical user environments and the web are the same people who are going to, where possible, invest in the direction of desktop environments and the Linux kernel in a direction that benefits them financially. I think there's no point pretending. By definition, any way possible, a company like Microsoft, Meta, Alphabet, Google, whatever, are going to do something for the benefit of their bottom line financials. Now, obviously, Google needs systems and Microsoft needs systems, and they, you know, use Linux servers and whatever, and there's benefits to them doing that. But direct financial incentives, namely things like subscriptions and purchases from the user, is what these companies are about. And if they can corrupt and abuse and destroy, you know, the Linux desktop as it's really kicking off for the normal person because of the increasing popularity, of course they're going to do that. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that. They're certainly going to target desktop environments, right? Because they invest in desktop environments, maybe nominally at the moment, but some of these companies are investing in desktop environments. And of course, when you invest money, you've got a stake in something and you can lean on people. Doesn't matter how principled you might think GNOME people are or KDE people are, developer-wise, KDE developers and GNOME developers. They're going to be leaned on. There's no point pretending. So, I even noticed a problem with Linux distribution. Yeah. Well, for me, forums are the most important. Big data computers existed before, but back then everyone used SNES console. No one was interested in AI. Yeah. Government take it by help of inflation. Yeah. Sometimes I think web is only commercial. User web should be some LAN web. Yeah, I don't know how you would do that. But again, the thing is, this is sort of why I don't think everybody having the use of a computer is a good thing. I'm not saying that like, oh, ban computers for certain people. What I'm saying is that until user interfaces came along, or graphical user interfaces, for most people it was a steep learning curve. And for companies, it wasn't seen as a obvious way to target people for advertising and selling. And unfortunately, these two have like inextricably linked in the 1980s and then particularly 1990s with the web. And this marriage made in hell means that that really there's no user benefit. It's just a consumer benefit. The user becomes a consumer because the majority of users want to be consumers. The majority of users want to use their computer to buy things. And they want to do that as easily as possible. And a lot of people say, well, that's fantastic. Hey, the democratization of the web, the democratization of computers. But I'm not saying ban computers or ban the web. I'm just saying I wouldn't see it as a bad thing if a lot of people didn't have a computer. had never got one, or if these user interfaces were never made or developed slowly, or were developed in a way that weren't to the benefit of corporations or to companies, but were more of a benefit to the user, gave the user more control. And that everyone else, like, we don't need that, we'll just get on with our lives. I don't see it as a bad thing. I would love to come back to text-only websites. That is why I like Gemini Protocol. Yeah, the thing with that Gemini Protocol is, you know, they made a big thing about it 5 years ago, but it's like Gopher. It's just not going to... Again, I guess this sounds like a contradiction, because what I've said is, well, I'm not, you know, I don't see it's a problem that, you know, not everybody's using it. And of course, not everybody's using Gemini. So what's the problem, right? People who are in the know use Gemini or use Gopher. But the sad, tragic truth is, I don't know how it is with Gemini specifically. I haven't really looked too much into. I have got like a web browser installed that handles Gemini or whatever. But there is also a point where nobody's really using it. And Gopher, I look at the indexes of Gopher sites. I don't know. It just seems like a barren wasteland. Maybe that sort of contradicts what I've been saying, but I don't know. And again, I'm not a huge advocate of Gopher in a sense. How to explain it? I think it makes sense. I think Gopher makes sense. And here's what I mean. So if you look at Gopher, if you look at the history of Gopher, Gopher was bigger than the web for those first few years. They basically were made around the same time, right? Gopher was a lot simpler on the face of it than hyper markup text or, you know, HTML, let's say. But Gopher, the university, is it, or I can't remember which university, University of Massachusetts or Michigan or whatever, that made the protocol, didn't want to make it open source. And what Tim Berners-Lee realized early on with the web was that when Gopher did that, it was like, wow, that's it. I've got them now, because it meant that the web could overtake Gopher, because, okay, now anybody can, you know, use it or understand the protocol, license it, create web browsers, I guess. There was no licensing issues, right? So the web just took off. And what the web enabled companies to do was sell. What they realized was, and advertise. What they realized was that, okay, now we're in control. We're going to take this over. You're going to be buying stuff from us. You're going to be paying subscriptions to services. You know, we own the space now, and we're going to build a shopping mall. We might chuck in a library at the end of it, but that's the dominant factors. And that was the, you know, one of the reasons why the US government pushed the internet, or the web, sorry, so hard in those early days. Or let's say the infrastructure for the internet to access the web in those early days was for this commercial thing. And I don't think that's a good thing. A lot of people think this is a good thing. Oh, everybody can, you know, have an e-commerce site and all this. It's like, really? Does everything have to be inextricably linked to selling on the web? Is that its only function? Oh yeah, but there's this side thing where you can get information. So everybody knows how it goes. Everybody knows what the end game is. It's money, right? And if you have no guardrails, or you have no principles or no design decisions that limit the destruction of the internet in its current form, which is the web, really, you get a dystopia, really, that's getting worse by the minute, because they are these companies that make billions already are so desperate to take over your computer, to sell you things, to have you to subscribe to things, that, again, you're not a user, right? You're a consumer. I know it sounds like some sort of cliche communist type, but it's really not. It's just, this is what it is. I'm not anti-business. I'm not anti-buying things. What I'm anti is the web and computers are driven by selling you things. The design is driven by to sell you things. There's no user control. If the user has control, that's something. The user probably won't exercise control, which is worrying. And that's why people buy computers, because they don't really care. But that's just what it is. So there's nothing wrong with literal e-commerce. There's nothing wrong with business. The issue is that the web is only designed for that by definition. Look at the 1990s and the history of the web. Look at what they talk about. They talk about commerce. That's what it's all about. They're not interested in giving the user options. Sure, there was all those notions about, a free internet, but it's really, all that meant was that, hey, you turn up to the shopping mall, right? You turn up to the shopping center. Now, Gopher, on the face of it, are like, you've got to pay a fee. Here you go. You can come in to the Gopher store, but you've got to pay a fee. What the web basically said, because it was all free and open source software, was like, hey, no, come around, look at all of our shops. Look at this shop face, look at that shop face. See anything you like, want to buy? Oh yeah, but if you carry on down the end, if you really want some user information, or you really want to have free information, yeah, we've got something little tucked in there, but we're going to make sure the algorithm feeds you all the sales stuff. All the adverts on television will be about selling you stuff, And the only thing with Gemini, I haven't really covered Gemini. The only thing with Gemini, it did seem to be also sort of hinting at, oh no, we want like inline images and stuff like this, which again, so if Gemini, say if Gopher won, right? Say in the early 90s, Gopher made all of their thing open source, and Gopher was like the de facto standard for interacting with the internet. Okay, you had Gopher pages everywhere. The web was like this little thing. The web had made itself proprietary, or the code wasn't free. They never really developed their protocol above, HTTP1, whatever, or they kept it minimal, whatever. And then they, did what Gopher did years later and say, oh no, now it's all open. It would have been too late for HTTP, right? Possibly. Because what would have happened is Gopher would have done exactly the same thing. The Gopher protocol was obviously kind of less elaborate than HTTP and HTML and all this kind of stuff. But it would have been the same thing, because it would have been like, companies are going to push for development. Now we need pictures in line. Now we need this. I can just see the same thing happening. Web browsers or Gopher browsers would have been more elaborate. Exactly the same thing would have happened what happened to HTML, HTTP and the web. It's just that HTTP and the web won, right? And Gemini would have been the same. But Gemini, I don't know. I'm not necessarily a fan of Gemini, but obviously it's probably better than the web. But how many people are using Gemini, I don't know. Maybe I should have a look sometime. An information exchange hub, yes, some local range. The gaming community is so upset with NVIDIA, but they haven't figured out they don't care about gaming GPUs. AI is their core business, yeah. Keyboards and mouse now, everything's moving towards smartphones and this human-machine interface. Yeah, the only thing I'd say with smartphones, at least interaction-wise, smartphones makes sense. Okay, I know we don't like, or I certainly don't like, you get your smartphone and it's like lockdown Google or lockdown Samsung stuff. You can't get rid of certain things, but at least actually using the device makes sense. If you're going to have a device that size, it makes sense. Yeah, the graphical user interfaces might not always be equal or as good as some others, but generally it makes sense. They don't. Let me put it this way: it's not the opposite of your laptop, as in it's like, oh no, you need like more physical buttons, so we're going to ship a keyboard with it. Now I know there's this sort of almost nostalgia for the old Nokia phone and the Blackberries where they had keyboards, and I know business people like them, but in my personal feeling, I can't imagine having to type on a tiny keyboard with my thumbs. For me, that seems like hell to me. I don't want to type on a keyboard. So I've used in the past, I've used like swipe keyboards where you can just actually, just get words and you can type. You can write pretty quickly, I find. And the sort of modal design of like Android and probably iOS, whatever, isn't actually too bad, I think. I know there's huge problems with it. I mean, I use graphene to get rid of all the Google gumph. Yes, there's huge problems with that, but actual design wise, I don't think they're a bad thing. If you're going to use if you're going to use a computer type device in a phone form factor, whatever you want to call it, I actually think that makes sense. It will reach a point where owning a keyboard equals being a hacker terrorist. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Teenagers can live now with smartphones and not using laptops. Yeah, well, again, the world they're growing up in is what it is. So it's interesting. I've thought about this before. There is a sort of nostalgia for like the world you grew up in being better. It's the cliche. It's like, oh, in my day it was better. I don't actually think that. So when I think of when I grew up, I think the 1990s was probably some of the worst years of computing I can imagine. So I've sort of covered like the web. I don't think the web was ever good as I remember it. So we got like the internet in 1996. I felt pretty early on that all the hype, like AI, all the advertising, all the promise was a huge lie. And I felt that even at a young age then. I felt like the promise of the internet or promise of the web, sorry, was a huge con. And it's never really gotten too much better. I think I will give one exception. I do think YouTube is a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing that's owned by Google, but I think despite its flaws, and again, it's just crammed with advertising. Although we all know, we all know what we think of YouTube and advertising in relation to software. I'm not going to say any more, but if you use Linux, you know what I mean. But I think one of the best things about the web is YouTube. YouTube has given the opportunity for people who they know what they're looking for can get something valuable for free on the face of it. Now, obviously, I'm not, again, going to advocate for all the other useless stuff on YouTube or video type sites, but I think in this way, YouTube is a good thing. Obviously, going back to my idea of GUI design or graphical user interface design, again, I don't see video and text as overlapping magisterian. I think sort of like the old web way would have been better. If, like, say, if you're watching a video, you could just have it outside of, what you're viewing on a web page, and maybe you have the comments. I mean, in a way, you can sort of do that now. You can pop out windows, but I mean by design. So you could still have YouTube in the design principles of the original web, but I mean, again, none of that matters. The whole point is, I do think YouTube is something good on the web. But what I mean to say is, I don't think the web has ever really been good. So I don't have what some people have. I think Luke Smith has this. Like, he has this nostalgia that the web was good back in the day. He had all these artisan websites. But like I've said before, I don't actually think that, the democratization, so to speak, of computers is a good thing. And when I say democratization, I'm not actually saying like, oh no, you don't get to have a computer, you're banned from having a computer. So democratize. What I mean is that there isn't a steep learning curve of sorts. I don't think it's like a steep learning curve, but that maybe a computer isn't for you. If you're a normal person, maybe you don't need a computer, therefore, in your life. Avoid the agony of advertisement directed at your eyeballs. Avoid the misery of having to have repetitive strain using a mouse day in, day out. How about avoiding, having like everything funneled towards e-commerce, whatever you're doing, just like socializing on, X or Facebook. Maybe you actually not having a computer isn't a bad thing for you. And yes, some people go, well, that's elitist because you know what you're doing. You don't go on that stuff. And yeah, so if I had a computer, no, I wouldn't be doing that stuff in the first place. I'd be hanging out with you guys, right? Talking about computers, meaningful developments in computing that is above or absent of just pure e-commerce all the time. How to make some kind of React framework website that gets this many hits and directs you to this page where you take a subscription, basically not that's not a bad thing. So, people who have computers use them for more than that's just e-commerce or advertisement. If that makes you elitist, well, good, be elitist, because that's better than being a consumer. That's how I feel about it. Teenagers can. Did you ever play RuneScape? No, I think I had a friend who played it. Luke Smith also defend JS because it helps to use Patreon or PayPal. Yeah, it's funny because I think he did a video on. Well, he did a video. Do you remember he did a video years ago? I guess because around the time Gemini was being touted around the internet as this cool thing where it was like the old web. I think people must have been asking him, hey, do a video on Gemini, do a video on Gopher. And he did a video on it, and he was basically saying, yeah, but if I did a website in Gopher, sorry, a website. If I did a Gopher site or a Gemini site, nobody would go to it because everybody's on the web. And in a way, he's right. If you made a Gopher site or a whatever, nobody would go on it. I think DT, funny enough, back when he was making kind of more interesting content or had sort of more interesting ideas, like Luke, he made a Gemini site, I believe. He was one of the first people to highlight Gemini. Not saying this sounds really bad. It's like, who am I to say as a tiny YouTuber with a tiny YouTube channel criticize DT? But do you remember when DT was actually a good YouTuber, or when he made interesting videos? He actually did. To be fair, he did cover a lot of things early on. Like, he was one of the first people. He was making like a Gemini website, and I think he even made a Gopher website, was hosting it. Now, of course, he doesn't anymore because people didn't go to it. So Luke was right about that. in a way. As for JS, I think he didn't, I mean, again, it's like a cliche. He didn't like the modern web, right? So he didn't really like modern JS, but he was fine with JS. I guess I don't like JS because, again, it's just really a continuation of everything in line. And JS is, you know, the advertisers, the marketers' dream, right? Because everything on the web, development around the web is so inextricably linked to JS. I know it's like CSS, and like it's CSS is like a hellscape to write. But yeah, I think he didn't like the modern web, whereas he liked the old web. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't think the web was ever good. Sorry. I think the design of the web, the original design of the web, was a lot better. But that early design, almost nobody experienced, right? That early design of the web was dead on arrival because everybody was using a PC. And if you look at the design of the web, it was for the next step computers. And the next step computers had things by design a different way. And this is what Robert Caliu said in the Dr. Chuck Internet History, which I recommend you read. I recommend you watch. It's all on YouTube. Instead of YouTube, could be some free FTP interface with videos. It could also work. Absolutely. So that's really kind of my feeling with it. So if you like go on a Gopher website, of course they'll integrate, you know, links to like FTP where you can download stuff. And you know, YouTube can work on, you know, as far as I'm concerned, similar principles. let's say hypothetically that the web lost, right? That Gopher made themselves free and open source software, and everybody's like, okay, now Gopher's the thing, it's cemented now. Everybody's gonna, you know, be using Gopher. The only thing is, if Gopher doesn't develop in the same way as the web, you're not going to have like the whole advertisement whole thing. But again, developing slower or slowly, whatever kind of interactive interfaces, you could have Gopher sites that have the latest videos, and you know, you click on a link and it downloads it in FTP and then say runs it on MPV or something in a separate window. And that if anybody had to have advertisement, have to make an effort to put it inside the video, right? And on the face of it, you know, advertising on like static text would look really clunky. You might have it, but it would look really clunky. You wouldn't have all this dynamic JavaScript loading, CSS, and all this kind of stuff. So you'd probably still have advertising. But yeah, you know, YouTube as a Gopher site, you know, using FTP or whatever to view videos or, you know, live streams. Of course, it would, you know, develop a different way. The irony is, I think that if Gopher won and was free and open source, I think it would just develop the same way as the web. You'd have somebody coming up with like something like JavaScript for Gopher. You would have CSS for Gopher. All of this stuff would be implemented because companies and e-commerce types would be desperate to get your eyeballs looking at adverts. You know, before you know it, they would have like, because they even talking about like Gopher Plus, right? You'd have text inline. It would be the same. I don't want it. Nobody wishes that to be true, but everybody knows that that's what would happen. DT were good, but I watched him but years ago when it was True and Honest. Some hacker ways later just content weekly views / ads. Yeah. The thing with him is I feel like he's still kind of earnest. And I mean, he's made a lot of videos, right? He's made thousands. He's covered a lot of stuff. But it feels like it's like a placeholder coasting. I know he's trying stuff, to the video man pages. In many ways, he's very impressive. In many ways, he's way more impressive than what I do. He's had like the dot file thing. I know Luke Smith has. He's had the, these different like customized window managers and whatever. And then he's made like, he made the DTOS thing recently. All great. But considering where he was, it just feels like it's like coasting for him. I don't know. Maybe that's inappropriate for me to say. I don't know. I learned, reasonable amount about Linux from him, like I did back in the day what Brodie Robertson did. Brodie Robertson in the day was great for, learning about Linux. Same with Luke Smith, of course. I'm not sure if you're referring to the same thing. I think the creator of JS also said that it's being used incorrectly, planned it differently. Yeah, if you look at the internet history of Dr. Chuck, he interviews the JS creator, never remember his name. Isn't he the one who also makes the Brave web browser? I don't know. And yeah, I think the thing with JS was the whole thing with JS was to have like a simple scriptable framework or language for web pages, right? But open a can of worms. So obviously it was always going to be developing the way it did. What was it for Netscape? I can't remember. Or was it for? That's always the funny thing with Netscape. People have like fond memories. They wish that Netscape had beaten Microsoft Internet Explorer. But if Netscape had beaten Internet Explorer, everybody would be paying subscriptions for web browsers. Yeah, Luke Smith from Linux to Religion. Yeah. Well, it's funny. If you look at a lot of Linux YouTubers, they go from Linux minimalism to Linux bloated. Luke Smith skipped the bloated and just went straight to Religion. Hi, Iron Fist. Wow, I can't believe it's nearly the 2-hour mark. How has that happened? Time goes so quickly when you're doing a stream. First to woods. Yeah. I always find it amusing. Mental Outlaw. Quite early on, he went into like farming, didn't he? But he still makes Linux videos. Hi, folks, survival. Good to see you active again, James. Thank you. Yeah, so with being active on YouTube, it's one of those things where I've got like plenty of things to make videos on, but actually having the time. So when I started my YouTube channel in its current form, I had some time off and it meant I could make loads of videos. And I always thought, okay, if I get into a rhythm of making videos like I did then then I would naturally work it around everything else. What happened in reality was that everything else took over and I had to prioritize other things, and that meant videos were more intermittent. What I'm trying to do now is, so as you might know, my original video camera had some issues with the microphone. So I've had to go to the webcam, which has been its own problems because I don't really like it's not that I'm not how to explain it. So recording videos now is just a huge pain, basically. My whole setup is actually more frustrating with the webcam than it was with the camera. So now what I'm tending to do is I'm trying to aim for more live streams and then taking the best bits of the live streams and kind of making videos out of them, because some people have told me that they can't go on the live streams because they're too long, and so they like, the shorter content like my videos. So I'm trying to mix up with, some of the stuff I do on my live streams and then videos maybe I do on my phone. So we'll see how we go. YouTube with 10K to 100K, so always start changing topics. We see games, religion, fine. What would you do? Well, I've said this before. I kind of run in the other direction. Now, that might not be believable because once you start having, huge attention on you, I say huge attention, it's not really huge attention, but say I had 100K subs, there is obviously a pressure to appeal to a mass market. And obviously I'm never going to get there because I'm actively running away even from using Arch and 64-bit computing in an unironic way. Therefore, I appeal to even less people probably using a 32-bit Libre booted 20-year-old ThinkPad where I can do practically nothing on the modern web, which is great actually. And I don't have desktop environments. I don't have elaborate fancy graphics and flashing animations or whatever, which means that I'm probably never going to hit those numbers. That being said, say I did hit significant numbers, I'd like to think that I'd run in the other direction of, okay, now I'm going to use Cosmic Desktop or KDE Plasma 6 point whatever. I'd like to think I'd continue in the same direction, but what do they say? Power and money corrupts. So I don't know. I don't think I'll be making a lot of money, but maybe the power would go to my head. Maybe I'd like put everything behind a paywall, like Lunduke or something. So yeah, I don't know. What would I do? Would I start playing video games? God, that would be cringe. I don't care really about visual side, animation, 4K and other things, only information important. Yeah, it was me. Always hate streams. Wow, so I've made you suffer through nearly 2 hours of a stream. That's dedication. I take that as an honor. Wow, 2 hours of stream and 5 people. But I always get the best people on my streams, Maybe I should put a little advance warning that I'm doing a stream. And I'll get, 20 people, 30 people. I remember when I did my first stream, I had like a what was it? I made like a post and I said, oh, I'm going to do my first Linux live stream. And at one point, I had like 30 people on. And back then, I didn't even have 1,000 subscribers. So, I don't know. Maybe I should. And just to say again about like, you know, being active or, I actually found it not like I'm desperate all the time to like, oh, I've got to make a video, got to make a video. But I did feel kind of frustrated that I knew there were topics I wanted to cover, Linux stuff that I wanted to cover, and like, oh, I just don't have the literal time to properly sit down and make a video. Because without sounding too conceited or arrogant about it, I do kind of feel that the Linux videos I make, you won't hear from anyone else. So even recently, you know, because it's a cliche to say, oh, you know, oh, the modern web is bad. Don't like the modern web. You know, it really sucks. Back in my day, the web was great. I've never heard anybody go, yeah, actually, it was never good. Really, the web was never good at all. And that, you know, rose tinted glasses or nostalgia can't make up for the web. All that handcrafted stuff, no, it was just junk. Because most people don't make. And I'm the same. I wouldn't be able to make a good website or relevant information or, you know, I mean, I guess if I really put my head to it, maybe I can think of something, but most websites handcrafted are just junk. If you go onto Wibby.me, right? So that's one thing Luke Smith would say to go onto Wibby.me, you can see handcrafted websites. If you go on Wibby.me, most of those websites are junk. Sorry. They might, you know, again, they're probably relevant to a niche of people. Maybe my videos are relevant to a niche of people. But let me just say like this, you know, a website about, I don't know, some like obscure 90s card game or something. Is it either informative, relevant, and are you even going to be playing that? Probably not. Whereas, okay, I'm not saying, you know, computers are the most important thing in the world. Obviously, in this environment, computers are a big thing, but the world uses computers, right? Your mum, your dad, your grandmother, whatever, your niece, your nephew, all using some kind of computer. So it's an important part of people's lives. They're using it for work, they're using it for home, whatever, research, education. So I feel like, you know, the stuff we talk about actually has real world implications for people's lives. Like I said before, if possible, why would you want to suffer the kind of design decisions that computers have made or people in computing have made over the last number of decades? I feel like that actually has some kind of relevance to people's lives. So although, you know, I've only got 1,700 or so subscribers and I don't get millions of views, I do try to, you know, without being too arrogant about it, feel like I'm making videos that maybe other people aren't making, even in Linux, but ones that do possibly affect people's lives because they spend so much time on the computers. And although I'm not a developer, although I'm not, you know, the best programmer in the world, like can do some programming, I do feel like my ideas on design, so to speak, are relevant in the modern world, and in light of things like the Horizon scandal, these are important conversations. And you know, say that have some fun with our chats. I don't know. Anyway, so take advice from the best, go to the forest, go to the garden, start complaining about the internet, joking. Well, that's it. It is just a matter of time before I start doing woods videos in the woods, rants or whatever it is, rants about computers. What is it? Walking in the woods videos, yeah. Wibby and those classic homepages are awful. I prefer a more minimalist, modern look, simplicity, but none of those 8-bit fonts and flashing, shiny elements like the 90s. Yeah. Like that was the other thing with Luke Smith. I know it's just like trashing Linux royalty here. I'm genuinely not trashing him because that's like, who am I to trash him? But and he's done some good videos, to be fair. And it's important for, you know, he's got good design principles, I think, on how to have your Linux desktop and whatever. Anyway, and the software. But when he started making a big thing about, you know, the web as it was in the 90s, and yeah, he had those, and he made a big thing about, I guess the best thing he made about was the web rings. I don't think a web ring is a bad thing. If you want relevant information, it's better than going through like some Google algorithm. I don't have a problem with web rings. I thought that was a good idea. But isn't it funny? Until recently, he didn't do any web ring stuff. He didn't like, oh, links to other things or whatever. And I know web rings are a bit more elaborate than that. They all sort of connect back to one another. Like, but you're part of a web ring, right? Anyway, that's all fine. But then he was like making a big thing. Oh, I made like some 2x5 pixel banner. And it's like, oh, this was when the web was good. And it's like, I thought at the time, it's just like, I guess this is like nostalgia for just something you grew up in. I never thought those were good. Like those horrible little GIFs. Yeah, I never liked. If you look at my website, okay, and now I'm not my website is not good. Oh, okay, my website is not good. That is it. That's my website, right? Is that a good website? No. But this is the point. I cannot make a good website because I don't think websites are good by design. Also, if I had like all those banners and whatever just because they're like 90s, it would make this very non-event of a website even worse. All this offers, right, are basically backlinks to YouTube and GitHub. Okay, that's basically all it is. And then like there's literally some reference information for screenwriting because it just fills up a bit of a page. It's like completely useless, pointless. But at the same time, I'm not going to just put in, I say nostalgia, put in superfluous things because of some notion of nostalgia. Blog rolls are better. Blog rolls. Yeah, I think I remember blog rolls. It's funny, isn't it? YouTube, Google used to have, I guess they still do, and blogs were kind of a thing. Their blog, was it Blogspot? So you could like be given a domain, blogspot dot or whatever it is dot blogspot.com. You could have like your little blog, like for free hosting or whatever. And then I guess you could link to other blogs. The links browser. Well, I believe my website works in Link's web browser. Let's have a look. Yeah, it seems to work all right in the web browser. The only thing is, it looks kind of different. Doesn't really work very well, actually. I don't know. When I looked at my website in the Link's web browser before, it looked slightly different. I don't know what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, it's technically okay in the web browser, in the Link's web browser. No. Maybe I should make a go for one. Have even fewer people visit it. Yeah. To be honest, nothing fills me with more dread, more horror, more nausea, more anxiety than the thought of designing websites. Genuinely. Just the thought of having to write anything in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So years ago, I did the free code camp HTML. Well, sorry, no, web design, advanced web design. I don't know, web design course, right? So if you do free code camp, you've got like sections on all kinds of stuff. I think it might have changed now, but it's like a course from beginning to end that in theory takes months or years, right? And the whole idea is that you start your computer learning journey at HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript, then you do some like algorithms maybe, then you do some like other things like Java and other programming languages. You learn like object oriented programming and all this kind of thing. But the whole idea, the funniest thing about all this, the whole idea is to get you a job at Google, Facebook or Meta, and other companies. It's not literally about getting, but we all know the direction. And most of the big employers that are tech companies, the tech companies that are big employers, are all about web design. So really, the whole thing is just to get you to set you up to do web design. And what I quickly realized after I did that first big section, the web design bit, and I passed it, I was absolute horror of it. I thought it was the most disgusting thing in the world. HTML and CSS are just like awful to me. And again, it was interesting, if you watch the Dr. Chuck History of the Internet, and you go to the bit where he interviews Robert Calliope, who co-created the web with Tim Berners-Lee, he hates HTML. HTML was not a design choice originally, in the sense of you don't write HTML. The only reason you had to write HTML was because the next step computers were not being used by the general public. The PC was, and the PC didn't have next step design integrated in it. And so what he realized was that now the web, you actually had to write the HTML. Before, it was all you had like some interactive editor in Next Step, which meant you dealt with them as objects and you could create objects. There was no HTML involved. HTML is like post Next Step web design principles. So look at that. If you ever get a chance, look at it. And he's right. HTML is just disgusting. CSS, just personally. So if you're a web dev and you like this stuff, I can't think of anything worse. And then imagine having to deal with JavaScript as well. So yeah, so after I passed the free code camp web design course, I couldn't do anymore. Literally that whole thing, I just couldn't bear it, because that's really what they want you to be, they're getting you to be a web dev. If you just want a job in tech, you know, you want to make bigger bucks, or maybe you've got some emotional attachment to like Facebook and you want to work with them, then I guess you don't want to pay for a university computer science course or boot camp or something, then that's really what free code camp is about. On the face of it, they've got courses on everything, but we all know that, you know, people employed in the world of tech, your average person in the world of tech, you know, is not doing anything but getting a job in web design. You know, for some e-commerce site or something, that's just the way it is. Probably writing, you know, React, JavaScript, TypeScript, or whatever. It's just the way it is. So I have the same with JS as you with HTML. Yeah, the thing is, I mean, HTML is just markup language, but outside of like graph, I don't want to be writing any of that markup. Certainly not for a web page. To me, it just gets my back up. Same CSS. CSS is just CSS is just even worse. I mean, tutorials are lean in one way. Corpo frameworks, how to make a website only look like Facebook, Google want. Yeah. Is, you know, and they don't really hide it, to be fair. If you ever watch like the free Code Camp podcast, I know, pretty cringe, right? But if you ever watch it, almost exclusively, all the people he interviews are in web design, or in web design, one way or another. There are, you know, some people. Sometimes you get people like cybersecurity, but even then, like their history is in web design. They're usually front end web design. That's the way it is, right? That's where the jobs are, or the jobs were. No, maybe in the world of AI, all the AIs will be making. Maybe all the AIs will be making the websites, and all the jobs will be in security because of all the security flaws that the AIs are making in the websites. So maybe the future is rosy for the developer. Developers won't make websites anymore. You'll have prompt engineers making websites, and then you'll have proper developers fixing all the security holes of the AI website designs, or all the front end and back end websites or whatever. I don't know. That would be funny. Maybe being in tech would be desirable after all. But then even then, I don't know about you guys. So like the whole modern day hacker thing, again, really, you know, it's sort of been romanticized, like hacking websites. And I don't know. Again, it's like building websites. I can't think of anything worse. I don't know. Maybe like the novelty of the power over you know, some domain, but I just can't think of anything worse, you know, having to deal with that stuff. Whereas like the old hacker, which was like, okay, I've got my computer, how can I make this work? You know, in a way, rather than a programmer, you know, I feel like, you know, when I'm making these scripts and, you know, when I made that TTYSH, you know, I felt like it's the old way of hacking. Like, okay, I've got Bash, I've got Shell, you know, I've got these tools that I want, and, you know, I can make the TTY into my own desktop environment. It was like that to me is like this sort of, you know, original. I know it's not technically hacking because you're not sort of bypassing the original intention, but I felt it in the way of like, you know, the TTY isn't intended to be your desktop environment. And it's like, no, I'm going to make it my desktop environment. And I sort of got 90% of the way there. But then, you know, at the moment I'm sort of, you know, messing around with C and whatever, and I'm, you know, I'm not trying to literally make TTYSH into a C program or anything like that, I would say at the moment. But I'm sort of experimenting with, okay, maybe I can take elements of TTYSH and make it into, you know, I don't know, some, you know, written in C. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good idea or a waste of time, but yes, I do. They always look the same. Was messing around with CGI and C to make a site at one point. Oh, interesting. What's CGI? CGI. Common Gateway interface is an interface specification that web servers to execute standard programs to process HTTP. Ooh. Got a feeling I've heard of CGI, but oh, so it's like an early way to make web pages interactive. Oh, interesting. How interesting. C API to query MySQL. Interesting. So using C to query database. So is that like, you know, instead of using modern day, well, not modern day now, but like PHP, because obviously PHP became a big thing for back-end development or the back end of a website, right? Well, that's why you had the LAMP stack, isn't it? Linux, Apache for your web server, MySQL, and then I guess PHP. So you could have the LANC stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and C, LANC. That's interesting. All right. They're saying use framework to learn to work in team to rewrite some commercial website like a new version of Instagram. Yeah. Yeah, instead of PHP, you can still use prepared statements. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, whenever I look at any of these languages, yeah, I'm not a developer. I'm not, you know, so knowledgeable about all the different languages. But whenever I've seen like PHP written, it just looks horrible to me. So that's nice you can write it in C. Yeah. Imagine having to write a version of Instagram. I guess people do like the technical challenges, but again, it would just get my back up. I just couldn't think of anything worse. Introducing a new version of Instagram or some social media to the world. You know, I guess loads of boilerplate code and whatever. But I'm not necessarily recommending this. No, I don't know how well it would work. I guess it would work, but probably easier to do it in PHP. But I think you know, if I was given the option of C or PHP, I'd choose C, even though it's not maybe as intended. But hey, I guess you got to use the right tool for the job sometimes. Speaking of like programming languages, it does sort of amuse me. Did any of you see that? Was it Lex Friedman interviewing DHH, whatever his name is, the Danish guy who made what, Ruby on Rails? And it was funny how much he hated like Python compared to, say, Ruby. He loved the syntax of Ruby. And when he showed like some examples of Ruby, like programming, I was like, oh yeah, that looks really good. You know what? That looks really nice. Oh yeah, that makes sense. But then the more I looked at like some of these, I don't know about you. I guess it's just, you know, conditioning and how you get used to things as well. But I noticed like Ruby doesn't really have any like semicolons or brackets. And I don't know about you, but that just bugged me. Like programming language without like separating functions with semicolons or something just bugs me. And then sometimes I look at C and I'm like, oh, you got this function here, this whatever statement here, and this conditional here, or whatever. It's like, but I don't know. It just bugged me about Ruby. Oh yeah, PHP uses C behind the scenes anyway. I forgot about that. I forgot how like Python course is dependent on C. Isn't it funny how Python is dependent on C, and everybody knows that Python runs, you know, so slow compared to C. Instead of solving crossword, I think I'll try to learn C someday so I can do something with Linux app text games that helps. Yeah, you could do. That being said, I mean, if you just want to do stuff in Linux, just use Bash and Shell. You know, again, they're inextricably linked with your shell anyway. You're just living in a shell. Just use Bash. It depends what you're doing, I guess. If you need to make some program from scratch, so to speak, then obviously use something like C. But depends what you're building, I guess. Text app text game apps. I just don't know PHP or JavaScript that well. A CMUD multi-user dungeon. Wow, 2.5 hours almost on this stream. Is that the longest stream I've ever done? It's getting close to. I think the first stream I did was a couple of hours, 2 to 3 hours. I don't know. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? In a way, isn't, if you think about it, C is for a long time sort of been, what's the word? For a long time now, C hasn't been the cool language, right? Probably since the 1990s. If you really think about it, C by the 1990s wasn't the cool language anymore. Everybody knows that so much has been written in C, so much is reliant on C written programs, and so much infrastructure and stuff has been written in C. But even by like the 1990s, think of how like C fell out of favor with people. C++ was like the big thing. Then it was like Java, yeah, and then it was JavaScript, right, which is still. Then it was something like Ruby maybe. Then Python. PHP, right? Now think of today, Zig and Rust. What is it? The Primogens looking at the moment, Elixir, and it's like, of course, everything's like frameworks these days. Yeah, I've again, not being a developer or tenuously a programmer or tenuously programming. I don't know. I don't think I'll look beyond C really. Not because, I mean, again, I'm sure Rust is very good for type safety and memory safety. But I don't know. Whenever I've looked at Rust, really, I haven't written any Rust, so I have no idea. But just looking at the syntax, it just annoys me. Something about it just annoys me. Like PHP, like JavaScript. I'm happy to write stuff in C. But I don't know. Whenever I look at syntax of some other languages, I can't think of many that don't just annoy me. So here's the thing: like years ago, around the pandemic time, when I was doing the web development, I also did like weeks and weeks of Python. And what annoyed me with Python, well, not necessarily annoyed me with Python itself, but the person who was teaching Python was like teaching it in object-orientated way. And I know arguably, Python is an object-orientated language, although it can be taught procedurally and all this. It just annoyed me. It's just so much about learning that language back then. I really, really didn't like it. The other thing that annoys me with Python, and this goes back to being a user, is that Python 2 was just like thrown on the scrap heap, not necessarily compatible with Python 3. And then everybody had to like upgrade their libraries to Python 3, and then all the Python 2 stuff that wasn't being maintained anymore. You couldn't, then they were like Python 2 has been removed from repositories. It's just, I always thought that was like scummy. Honestly, I thought that was like the scummiest thing ever. That suddenly all this software was broken, and that if it wasn't maintained, anytime you install a distribution or they remove Python 2, you're screwed. Normal people just like have no options. Like, no, out the repositories, you're going to have to compile it or some stupid thing like that. Compiling Python 2 to work with and all the like the library. It's just like, really? That is like the scummiest thing to do. yeah, when Python 2 moved to Python 3, that really annoyed me. Like the amount of breakage is just, you know, terrible. All those programming languages do exactly the same thing, translate code and CPU instructions. The difference is overrated. Yeah, absolutely. It really is just down to preference. Or to be fair, you know, if one tool, if a programming language is more useful to do certain things, then, you know, I understand that as well. Recently, I've been looking for window manager written in C because I know that one day the packages will be abandoned by distros and I'll have to compile them myself. So fewer dependency and smaller, simpler. The best for me. GCK is written in C, but some sort of pseudo object oriented code. But if you want a window manager, i3 is written in C. DWM. That's what you mean, window manager, right? I mean, the thing with DWM, so the irony is that those packages were abandoned by distros. And I've said this before, I'm not a fan of installing outside of the package manager. It's not to say I won't do it or I won't install things outside the package manager, but when certain things that are particularly important to your user system, let's say like a window manager or even a desktop environment, particularly a window manager for what kind of stuff I do or we do, I just don't like the idea that with DWM that I would run a system where I have to install something as critical as my window manager by compiling it outside the package manager. Now, I know you have, you know, unofficial AUR, you know, binaries of window managers like DWM, but again, that's like then against the point of DWM. The whole point of DWM is to do that 2-second compilation or compiling. But in principle, for me, it's just something, I don't know why. You know, I've used DWM, it's really good. In a way, it's preferable to i3. But the principle for me is i3 is in the main repositories, therefore tested in the main repository or tested on the system. And it's like official, just feels official to me for something so important. I don't know, it's just how I feel about it. I mean, if there was no other way, then yeah, I'd compile it, but or you know, if there were no window, for whatever reason, no window managers that were worth having in the main the repositories of the distribution. Yeah, just certain things I would never, in principle, and I think good practice, go outside of the main repositories. That's also why now I'm using Libra distributions such as Hyperbola, which makes great strides and principles about not installing outside of the package repository. I don't compile anything on there out of principles to keep. I want to be consistent. So yeah, you have to make compromises. But anyway, I'm going to finish the stream in a minute. So if anybody's got any like final questions or whatever. Okay, no worries. All right, guys, thank you very much for spending some time on your Sunday hanging out here. It's been fun. I mean, those 2 hours and 30 something minutes have flown by. I don't know about you. So anyway, thanks again, guys, and hopefully I'll do some more streams soon. Look out for my videos. We'll try to upload more regularly. I have got videos coming out this week that are a kind of amalgamation of stuff I've already done on live streams. So if you miss the long form live streams, hopefully you can pick up the main points from my videos now. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, take care. Have a good week. See you later.